Eric's gone and I'm back. The next talk is going to be Paul Roeland, and he's going to encourage docs advocacy. Here he goes.
Yeah, does this work? Yeah, it does. Hi, my name is Paul Roeland, and I will be promoting some activism in our docs world today. And it's called MacGyvering your docs. I'm probably showing my age here, but I hope most of you will remember MacGyver. It's on endless reruns on most channels on the middle of the night. A little bit about me. I actually earn my money working for a non-profit, the Clean Clothes Campaign. We work in the garment industry, so we try to make sure that people don't die stitching your $5 t-shirt. So we work a lot in Bangladesh and Cambodia and those kinds of countries. And I work unpaid for a big Python content management system called Clone. It's probably the best CMS you have never heard of. It's been around for a very long time, but it's mostly used by larger organizations. I am on the documentation team, the accessibility team, and I'm active in the foundation. And both of those are pretty stressful jobs, and to take my mind off things, I organize a film festival, because that's so relaxing to do. I organize the Roze Filmdagen, which is the Amsterdam gay LGBTQ film festival, and really running around harassing other people to get a festival online is much more relaxing in a weird sense to me than lying on the beach reading a book. So, I'm going to talk about the deepest, darkest feelings you sometimes have when you're on a documentation team. I think some of you have been here before. You have the feeling that developers, they all hate you because they never deliver on time and they never do what they're told. Users just take you for granted. They never sort of really appreciate all the hard work that goes into documentation. And especially if you're working for like a non-profit, non-budgeted organization, it's like everybody else has like a budget and money and people, and you're just sitting there stretching your volunteers really, really, really thin. And suddenly, yeah, it's like, it can be a really sinking feeling. Hands up, those of you who have had that feeling now and again. Yeah, there's a pretty good bunch of you. So, and suddenly you're overwhelmed with this feeling like, it's all so unfair. There's a scientific name for the syndrome, it's called Calimerism. This is Calimero, a hero from my youth. He's a small chicken that is constantly complaining that the world is like extremely unfair to him. But how do we get in this situation, and hopefully how can we develop tools to get out of that situation, that sinking feeling like, oh, nothing is working. Quite often when you start a documentation team or when you're beginning a documentation team, your approach is like, we're here. Now, bring us your docs. Especially in an open source project. That's what I call the bland optimism attempt. The picture, as some of you may recognize, is from a performance called The Artist is Present by Marina Abramovic. Basically what she does, she sits on a chair in a museum and then waits. And then people can come up to her and ask questions or start a conversation or do anything. That's basically what sometimes your documentation team is doing. It's like, we're here. And if you've ever been to to the Artist is Present performance, you will know that it is extremely uncomfortable. Like really, really, really uncomfortable for both parties. But Marina is a pro, so she knows how to handle it. But the silence is really, really, really uncomfortable. So just waiting for stuff to happen, not really working. That's like, no, that's just not the plan. So usually what we do next, well, we're in an open source project, so you can't really order people around. That's practical if you are the manager of like a multi-gazillion-dollar company, but as an open source project, you cannot do that. So our next attempt is, we ask nicely. We're like, please, please, will you help us out? Will you please, everybody do the right thing and write docs and we will correct them, and it sort of doesn't happen. And so, because we're basically asking the world in general, non-specified, the community at large. So I think we're basically often behaving as complete amateurs. We really don't have a clue how to deal with people properly. So it's obviously obvious that we're going to need some help. Help. We need to help. We're not quite sure where to get the help from, but we have some clue that's got to do something to do with people and interaction and those kinds of things. So we need help, so we're calling out for a hero. And one of the heroes, now I'm going off on a slight rant, this is actually MacGyver. Why I don't want to call out on the hero is actually because hero worship sucks. We do that a lot in the tech community and I hate it. I hate the word rock star. You've heard it so many times. You have like rock star programmers, rock star documenters, rock star this, rock star that. Rock stars are probably pretty nice to look up if you look into a stadium. If you want to live with them, they're horrible. They puke on your carpet, they drink your booze, and then they overdose in the toilet. It's really not very pleasant to have them on board. Even worse is our obsession, and I really think that words, I mean we're all writers here, words that are important are, we use the word ninja and warrior a lot. Like documentation ninja, code warrior. I'm sorry, ninjas and warriors are unpleasant people. They kill people for a living. That's not what you want. And ninjas are mercenaries. So basically, when you're asking for a code ninja, it's like, let's have a homicidal maniac whose only loyalty is to the highest bidder. Yeah, that will be an excellent addition to our team. Really, if you're in human resources, stop using those words now, please. We need less rock stars, we need more caregivers. Caregivers, think nurses, think teachers, think counselors, think tree surgeons if you want to be macho about it. Those kinds of people, we need nurturing people. That's what we need, that's what the tech industry needs to be more inclusive and to cater for the users better. I've actually had this discussion with a few people before, and some of them were like, but won't that affect our status? And won't that affect our pay? And I'm like, well, first of all, the obvious answer is that we need to pay our nurses and our teachers a lot more in our societies. And second of all, honestly, if our status and our pay gets a little bit lower, in return for a much saner industry, excellent, I'm all in for it. It might actually make places like San Francisco and even Amsterdam and other tech-infested places, a lot nicer places to live. So, we need to really stop using these hero worshipping. Okay, end of my rant. I'm going to continue the presentation, which will obviously use a lot of images of rock stars and warriors. Just because I can. I'm going to go back to the MacGyverism, the title of my talk. What do I mean by MacGyvering? MacGyvering is actually put the things you find to clever use. That's the definition. That's my definition. That sentence is worth analyzing. So let's separate that out. First, put the things you find. And note that I use the word find very loosely here. Beggars can't be choosers. If you're an underfunded non-profit or an open source organization, find means you will actually and actively have to go looking for stuff. But there's a lot of things you can find. One of the tools you can use And it's probably the first and only time it's actually useful is everybody's most hated social network. Well, it's not even a social network, it's more of a stalker network. It's LinkedIn. We all hate LinkedIn. But if you actually follow around what the people you went to university with, what they're doing now, what the people you went to kindergarten with, what they're doing now, it's amazing. You can find all of your old people back, and some of them have like really great jobs that touch on what you are doing. For the clone documentation team, we found somebody who is now a content manager for Elsevier Reed, which is like a giant scientific publishing corporation. I know her from the squatting scene in Amsterdam hundreds of years ago. A friendly call, and she has helped our documentations immensely. You can also find people that now work for universities, for museums, for art institutes. They always have the most amazing places to meet, and if you ask nicely, you can have a sprint there for free. Excellent. So, and you can also just get help from kind strangers. So, really, if you go look for something, actually what you're looking for is people. That's the recurrent theme here. Your network, you amass an amazing network over the course of your life. Sometimes you forget about people, but it's good to now and again backtrack and see who you met over the course of your life. And just be bold and ask them, like, could you help? And amazingly enough, most people are actually quite friendly, and they will help, and they will feel better for it. But, so, this is all about people. You know who is really good at dealing with people, at activating people, at talking to people? Non-profits. They're really good at it. By the way, obviously, as you all recognize, this is the killer rabbit of Cabernac, which is the most fearsome creature in the universe. From Monty Python, for those of you who don't know. Non-profits are often looked at as kind of fluffy organizations. They're not. They're really not. And there is always some confusion around the term. For some reason, non-profits define themselves by what they're not doing. It's a really strange word. It's like non-profit, not making money. That doesn't say it all. I mean, there's a whole class of people and organizations that don't make money. We call them startups. Non-profits, the ones I mean is the ones that have a background in activism. Those that have campaigners, those that have a vision, those that have a cause. That's what I mean by non-profits. And I think it's, yeah, that's why I wanted to stress the definition. Bit of personal history. The first one, probably, well, one of the first ones that launched me into a lifelong activist career was ACT UP. Now, ACT UP was a particularly angry activist group. It's probably not the one you want to emulate right now. But there are so many others that have successfully employed a mix of activism, zaniness, but also organizing, like really grassroots organizing. That can be Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace. There's too many to mention. Most of them come sort of like from the new social movements from the 70s and 80s, when a whole new sort of do-it-yourself ethic was like, well, if the government does evil stuff, we're just going to organize. We're going to stop those cruise missiles. We're going to do whatever. And even today, in the 90s, it seemed like that kind of activism was dead. But suddenly we had first the anti-globalization movement, and we had Occupy. There's still creative activism around. And what these people do is they set agendas, and they really make themselves noticed. Without much money, but they just do. So why would you want to be involved in such an organization? Well, you get to do so much more than in a normal job. You put your heart in it. And although it can be sometimes hard, it can also be really fun. I love doing this, and there was actually a political point to it, but it was also amazingly fun. You get to break all the rules while doing things. But while most activist organizations start out with the idea that sort of like, we're going to exist for 2 years and then the world will be fixed, that's how they begin, usually they end up being more institutional and getting more organized in a more long-term fashion. So, because everybody wants to be respectable in the end. So, over the years, and it's sort of an analogy to what the tech industry has done, the non-profit industry, yeah, I can call it an industry, has developed a whole set of working methods, methodologies, theories on how to deal with people, because that's their basic working material, it's people. So, yeah, the tech industry got overwhelmed by how we develop software, so open source came along, agile and all its varieties came along. Non-profits have found a lot of those as well. One of the most important ones, and honestly, for the last 4 or 5 years, no pencil gets lifted within a non-profit organization, is, oh, sorry, I'm really good at forgetting my slide. The non-profits realize that, yeah, for lasting results, you cannot rely on enthusiasm alone. You need planning. You need proper planning, and it's not just down to a stroke of good luck and just sheer talent. You need proper management for that. One of the things that was developed is, for instance, the theory of change model. Now, the theory of change might sound like the theory of change. It's not. For every project that you endeavor on, you develop a new theory of change. Sometimes even 2 or 3. I easily go to 6 or 7 of theories of changes in a year in my campaigning work. And there's a lot of words here. There's like assumptions, there's like interactions, indicators, narratives, frameworks. There's a whole knowledge, volumes of knowledge out there on how to do this. In the really 20-second version, what you do is you say like, here's where I want to end up. This is like my ideal situation, what I'm trying to reach in this project. And then you do backward mapping. Say like, okay, what are the individual steps that I need to be taken to reach that goal? And well, this is well documented. You can read about it. You can get courses, there's conferences on it. It's a really good methodology to achieve social change. But there's a lot of words, so you would have to learn some new skills, and there's also false friends. When non-profits talk about a framework, they're not mentioning Flask or Drupal or anything. Their framework is what we would call a template. So you have some false friends in the translation from non-profit English to tech English, and the other way around. But we're all good with language, we can learn this. From all of the words, I want to point out a few hard ones, because most of them are actually quite simple. But the hard ones is that you have to define your target. Who are you actually targeting in your attempt to change behaviors, attitudes, and you cannot just say everybody. That's setting yourself up for failure. You have to be more specific than that. The same thing is scope. What is the limit of what you're trying to achieve? Saying I want world peace is probably really good if you're competing in the Miss World or Mr. Gay election or whatever, but it's not going to help. It's too broad. You need to narrow your scope. You need to say like, this is what I'm going to do. I can't do everything at the same time. The tough one is there's something called outcomes. Outcomes are the things you actually want to achieve. And preconditions are things that need to be in place for those outcomes to materialize. But there's a cyclical relation between them. The outcome of a part of your project can become the precondition for the next part of your intervention. And round and round and round it goes. So that's often quite hard to visualize in the first place, but using tons of post-it notes you actually can. And one of the most difficult ones is, but the theory says you really have to do it, is set a threshold. And the threshold is, when is it good enough? Do you really need to convert 100% of your developers to be expert document writers? It's probably unrealistic. Would 25% be good enough? Would actually 5% be good enough? But if they're key influencers, would that make a difference? So you have to define a threshold. Otherwise, you're just, again, setting yourself up for failure. Maybe not everybody's familiar with outcomes. Some of the outcomes that you're trying to achieve are an enabling environment for people to work in. Strengthen the capacities, set agendas, change policies. Note that none of these are actually so and so many hospitals in Africa built, or so and so many pages of documentation generated. That's output. Output is secondary to outcomes. You want outcomes, and if your outcomes are good, the output more or less comes naturally. And don't try to get all of these outcomes at once. If you target like 2 or 3, I would say you're already pretty ambitious. So, whenever you try to tell this to a tech crowd, their first reaction is like, we don't want these fluffy people things here, we want real tools. But as the famous philosopher Admiral Akbar from the Star Wars Rebel fleet said, it's a trap! There is no greater waste of time than discussion about tech tools. It is what tech people live in their comfort zone. It's sort of like talking about people is scary. Talking about what's the best editor, or what's like, let's rewrite everything in Haskell. That's really into your comfort zone. If you want to get out of that, you will have to do the people thing, and it's scary. So, of course, you do need tools. Even MacGyver needs a tool. This is the entire MacGyver multi-tool. It's a paperclip. I tend to use Git, Sphinx, Robot Framework, and some continuous integration. But don't overdo it on the technical tools. Use them, not abuse them. The best tool chain in the world will, at maximum, only help existing contributors work more efficient. The best technical tool chain in the world will not get you more contributors. So, I hope I made that point clear, and then we suddenly reach bliss. Rainbows, butterflies, unicorns, kittens, the world, we're happy, and we couldn't be nicer. I'm really sorry. It's not that easy. You would probably have guessed that already. By using the tool set of the nonprofit world, you're just importing a whole new set of problems. One of those is obsession. The stakes, the drama get a lot higher if you have the feeling you work for a cause. People don't quit your organization, they rage quit. People can't really take a faraway look sometimes anymore. One of the more difficult one is the preacher complex. The preacher complex, I suffer from that quite a lot, is that I can't imagine that somebody else couldn't care about the Bangladeshi garment industry. Because that's what I do. And it's like, everybody should do that because it's so obvious. It's my world, and the real big danger in that is that when somebody doesn't share your enthusiasm or your beliefs, you don't see that as, okay, they do not deliver, or you actually see them as morally wrong. And that is so wrong. So preacher complex is really hard to get over, but it's something that is a real risk if you're viewing your project as a cause, as a thing to believe in. And it's really hard to realize that other people may not share your enthusiasm or share your dream because they have other stuff to do. They may have children, they may have other projects, or, and that's the hardest one, they may just not simply be that into you. It's a really hard one to swallow. And the last one that's really prevalent in non-profit organizations, it's hard to let go. So people suffer burnout quite often. So that's a danger. And that's why it turns out that the threshold and the scope part are necessary to define. If you're suffering from picture complex, it means you set your scope and your threshold way too high. You're trying to convince all the people all the time. That's going to fail. So, yeah, I live on sort of this flip coin of campaigners and techies, and I love my campaigners. And learning should go both ways. But sometimes it's hard. I mean, I set up like a GitLab for the rest of my campaigners because I was like, we can't be sending each other Word documents around all the time because it's just not working. And they were like, oh, excellent, we can put them in there and we can see who wrote the last Word document. And I was like, that wasn't quite the point. But they were like, you can take those binary blobs from my dying hands. So there's a lot that tech people have to learn campaigners, but there's also a lot that campaigners, that tech people can learn from campaigners, and vice versa. So I'm starting to round up. If you want more docs, you have to enable your contributors. That's the only way you can get more docs, apart from cloning yourself, which might be possible in the future, but not quite now. Money is hardly ever the issue. It is not the precondition. Money can be a great accelerator. And if you don't have money, it can delay you, and you have to work around that. But I haven't actually seen many cases where money is like, the lack of money is an inhibitor. At worst, you will have to spend some time fundraising. Money should not be your first issue. What should be your first issue is that you're eyeing social change. And that can be social change within your own organization, within your team even. But this is social change what you're doing. And so learn the tricks of that trade. And there's more. I have mentioned now the theory of change. There's more. I design also supporter journeys. My organizations use supporter journeys. That's like a story of somebody who wants to support us. Supporter journeys have a scope of like 10 to 20 years. Where do you want that person to be in relation to you? In the tech world now, we're really happy if we have onboarding in place. Onboarding is like the first step. You need to think like, how are you going to progress from that? How can people grow? How can you nurture? How can people become your next project leaders when you are tired and you're burned out? So think further. And unfortunately, you're not going to get it right the first time. As any ball of petunias in the improbability drive knows. You need to repeat this to get it right. Getting it right is an elusive concept anyway. Getting it better the second time, make more interesting mistakes, should be more of your goal. Getting it right might be pushing it. But still, what I want to say is you don't need that many tools. You need knowledge, you need skills, you need to think about people. You're working with people, much more important than working with tech. So once you've realized that, I'm asking you to learn some new skills and go save the world. Yeah, and I'm sorry I'm bombarding you with animated GIFs, but I love animated GIFs. So, but this one is particularly annoying. So I have the last one. We can do an experiment. I have 40 seconds, I think. One experiment I would like to do is to get you all back into a happy place after I made you miserable, is that we participate in the first mass Write the Docs karaoke. So come along, sing along, Raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied up with strings. These are a few of my favorite things. Thank you very much.
It's one of my favorite musicals, and I like a lot of musicals. We're going to have a word from another one of our sponsors. Alden is going to come talk to us for a little while.